Morning.
Morning.
I was wondering why my desk was so nicely mint green, but I now realize it's just the shine of the screen behind me and not the actual device. Anyway, good morning. Hope you had a good day so far. I know it's a bit early. It feels early to me. So I'll be giving a chat about what's the new things in Xdebug. And maybe some of you might be using it for a while. Some of you might not have been using it for a while. I hope that most of you will get something out of it regardless. And so let me get straight into these things. So hi, I'm Derick. I'm European. There's a specific reason why that's on the screen, but to find out you have to talk to me later. I do most of my work for the PHP Foundation, an organization that is there to promote the PHP language. And the intention is to get some companies to pay for some money so that they can then pay for people to work on the PHP language. And I'm part of the people that do this then. One of the 10 developers that the PHP Foundation hires. I don't actually end up doing so much PHP development work at the moment, but it's mostly all the server infrastructure behind it, because that also needs doing, and nobody volunteers for that kind of annoying stuff, right? I'm the author of Xdebug. I've been working on that for about 23 years, give or take. I can't really quite remember. I like maps, beer, and whiskey. Irrelevant, but I thought I'd mention it. If you have any questions, the email usually works, but I don't put it on the screen because I get too much email anyway. So Mastodon is the way to go. The last few people coming in here before I get going. There will be code on the slide, and I will be demoing quite a lot. So I have prayed to the demo gods this morning, but you never know whether that works or not. All right, let's get going then. So, Xdebug info. You have heard of PHP info, right? Hopefully. Now, Xdebug info is the same thing. Now, why is this useful? When setting up this presentation or talking about it, I got a message saying, oh, well, almost everybody uses ddev to develop with Drupal. So I said, well, I should try that out then, right? So I did. After a bit of messing around, I got that going, or so I thought. So I got my Drupal site. Sorry, I had to press reload. I got my Drupal site going. I don't actually know which one this is. It's some kind of demo one. I have to admit I know nothing about Drupal. Not very much, a little bit more than I did last week. And I wanted to debug this, right? So I have in my browser, my IDE, I have like the indexed info file, and I set a breakpoint on like line 14. So in VS Code, you can open your project and set breakpoints by clicking on them, and then I can do listen. Then everything starts flashing and get a nice orange line. And then what should happen if I reload this page, it should pause in a debugger, right? That's what you would expect. And that indeed happened. It stopped on this line. This was not intending to work. So, ignore the last 15 seconds. Let me reload this again, and as you can see, nothing happens. This is the problem when you go to your demos and you fix everything and then forget to unfix things. Anyway. So yeah, nothing happened, right? Why would that be? Anyone wants to throw guess? Port forwarding? No, that's not it. Let's find out why it isn't the case, because that's what I'm actually here to teach you, right? So now, normally you shouldn't edit any of your standard Drupal files or any other framework files, obviously. But it is sometimes useful to just add an extra line. I can bet that some of you have put PHP info in this location, right?
Never.
I know, I certainly have. And now there's some liars in the front here. So when I now load this, I get, instead of PHP info, I get Xdebug info. I make that a bit bigger because it looks like it clashes with some of the Drupal's CSS here. And it will tell you exactly what version you use. So I use a very brand new version, basically Git, because while developing this presentation I found a bug that I had to fix, so I haven't had the time to release it. And it tells you a bunch of things here in the diagnostics logs about stuff that didn't go according to plan. I will ignore these first two for a moment because I'll get to that in a moment. It says here, we tried operation now in progress. Apparently that's an error if you're Linux. I don't know what about this. But the interesting one is here. It says, could not connect to the host discovered through HTTP headers, connecting to the configured address hosted Docker on internal, which is what ddev has configured you to do. And it didn't work, so it couldn't connect. That makes sense, because I hadn't put the ID in listen mode, right? So if I click on listen here now, do this again, and now something else shows up, right? The first two are still there, I'm still ignoring them. But then the third one basically says the breakpoint file name where I put my breakpoint didn't work. If you click on this thing here on the side, you go to the documentation that explains why it couldn't have worked and what you could do to fix it. But this is a common thing in so many projects. If you run something in a Docker container, or ddev, which is also a Docker container, or a remote machine, then the path that you have on the remote machine or in Docker doesn't match your local path. This is why we have path mappings. And if you read through the documentation properly of ddev and other fine tools, then they will tell you what you need to do. And the traditional ways of that is to do that in your, where does it go? Launch.php. I thought I had that open. Too many files here. Where did it go? Where did that go? Oh, sorry. There's too many files. There we go. The normal way why you do that is you do that here. So it's just like path mappings, right? That's where you can edit that. But I'm not going to do that now. Instead, my editing skills are not great. Instead, what I've done is the launch.json file is in the VS Code directory, .vs Code directory, where it just stores it there and you can save it in your repository. But I've created the .xdebug directory, and I put a file in there called path mapping.map. So if this is in the root of your project, like where you put the VS Code thing, then you can set up your path mappings directly in here. Now, obviously, I need to remove the hash that I just added to make this line work. And basically what this line says, it says match this directory on the file on where PHP runs to the file where my project is. At the moment, you have to create this file yourself, but I can imagine that ddev at some point does this for you, so you don't have to think about it anymore. Now, with this line now made, I can now reload the page, and then with some luck, it stops on line 14. Fingers crossed, everybody. And it certainly stopped. And indeed, it stopped on this line 14, which is a really nice way of having to make these path mappings without you having to do this in the configuration of your ID. Now, this is maybe not so useful here, but the path mappings can also be made between any directory and any other directory, between any file and any other file. This can get useful when you have templating languages. Like if you write your trick templates, for example, they get compiled to PHP files which are being run. But in order to debug that, you need to set up breakpoints in the compiled PHP files that have been created. But you can't do that in your IDE because you need to, well, you can, but you need to figure out where these files are. But these path mappings will allow you to set a breakpoint in your template file where you're editing it, and it will pause when the file gets run, but it gets mapped to the correct line in your template file, so you can step through your template file and see what happens there. I haven't set up the conversion of variable names yet, but that is something I'm really looking forward to as well. But there are other things that you can do with here as well. So let me just step through this a little bit further. So first we require the autoloader, and then we want to see, well, what happens if I do new Drupal kernel? I know you will know what happens, but I have no idea. Right? I'm just stepping in. But of course, when I step into it, I don't end up in a kernel. I end up in your class loader. Now, how often do you need to debug through the class loader? Like, never, right? Or, going further than this, how often do you need to debug anything in vendor/composer? Almost never, right? Or, if you're just working on a Drupal project, do you really need to go into vendor Symfony or anything like that? There's no reason to debug these, right? And it just makes for you to have to create extra steps. So that is something else that you can do with these path mappings. So I find where it is. Too many things in here. I've created another one, which is called skip vendor map. Well, these names don't matter what they are, but I do need to enter in .map. So if I comment that out and I do equals skip you can guess what it does. It will just skip anything in vendor composer. Now, for that to work, you do need to reload your current request. It doesn't do that automatically because these files are only read when PHP request starts. So I will press continue and then try again. Again, it stops on the autoloader, which I will jump over. And then I jump into new kernel. Anybody guess what's happened now? It stops in the Drupal kernel, which is what you expect it to do. So I think this is actually also a useful feature to have, especially for skipping all this. I shouldn't say that loud composer nonsense, because Niels might be. So this is kind of a useful thing to have. Now, there's a few more other things. I should go through my slides first before I speak, because otherwise I get lost track. Done that. Right, so breakpoints are, this is the internal protocol how it works, but I also wanted to show you is that breakpoints can be set on multiple different things. You have seen me clicking on the line, that makes it stop on the line. But you can also set breakpoints on when the function starts and when the function exits. Now, not all IDEs have support for this. PHP Storm and VS Code both have support for at least the call, but I'm not actually sure whether it has support for return. But similarly, there's also a way of setting breakpoints on exceptions or breakpoints on lines with conditionals. So let's show these as well. Right, so I will abort this so we get a nice wide screen. So let's first have a look at where did my path mapping file go? So I'm going to actually disable the path mapping at the moment. Not the path mapping, the skip vendor, sorry. Because that allows me to show something else. So let me reload this again. Yeah, and I need to listen. So it stops on the autoloader. I want to jump over it, but now I'm jumping into the class loader just because. So I want to show you something here. Now, if I put a breakpoint on this line here, right, that means every time a class gets loaded, it stops here. So let me just do that a few times. Now, how many files are there in any sort of Drupal project? There will be tens of thousands. Well, maybe thousands. But if you want to debug just the inclusion of a specific file, you don't really want to loop through all of them and then hope it is one of the first three, because you know as this goes, it's always one of the last three in these lists, right? So what would, in case if I actually can check for a specific condition and then only break when this condition matches? So we have this breakpoint here. Here in the bottom left, you can click the Edit Condition button. So I think this UI is a bit weird because it just suddenly appears in the middle of something that already had text. But what you can do is there's a few things in here. You can do expressions, hit count, and a log message. Log message, I actually have no idea what it does. I think it's something that VS Code does. So. But the expression is kind of handy because what I can now put in here is class equals, where are we? Symfony. My typing skills are terrible when people are watching. I think it says server back. That presumes says that. That's the one I tested with. Let me check. Yeah, I didn't get the namespaces wrong there, but I think it was this one. So this expression is now being evaluated when this breakpoint hits. So when Xdebug sees this line being executed, it will then run this statement, and if this statement evaluates to true, it breaks. This statement is being evaled in your PHP code, so you can do anything in there that you want to do, and also all the things you really shouldn't do, like running exec rm-rf / right? You can do that, but I wouldn't recommend it. But it is just PHP code that you run in here. If you want to do something more complicated, you often have to put it between parentheses, but your IDE will tell you when you need to do that. But with this equality statement now, I said it, I will stop this and listen again, then reloads. It still stops on the autoloader like we expected, and then we click next. And then it stops, indeed, when the class is just a server back, which is like the 10th or something in my list. It's quite neat, isn't it? Now, there's a bunch of other things in here. While I'm here, I should probably show. I've removed this. So how often have people set a breakpoint? that explanation only works when it's not in a debug request, because Xdebug does immediately what I was about to show you. How often have you set a breakpoint on the line, on an empty line, by mistake? Yeah, it happens as well. But what is often more common is that people set breakpoints on lines where they think there is code, but there isn't actually code. Because sometimes PHP internally doesn't record the correct line number with the line of code that you're writing. Now, if you see something like that, it is sometimes a bug in PHP, and we have fixed many of these. But also in some cases, when you're editing code, your breakpoint, because your ID doesn't sync properly, ends up being on the empty line. Now, if it's on the empty line, you think you have a breakpoint there, but when you run it, it doesn't break. So let me show that too. Oh, I can only show that, of course, when I'm listening. So if I load this now, and then when I look at it, it stops in the autoloader. We expected that. Click next. And you can indeed see that it didn't stop on the line where it set a breakpoint, but it stops in the next one. Because it's clever enough to now look a little bit further to see, to hopefully guess where you thought you actually wanted to put your breakpoint. Now the algorithm for this is kind of interesting, so I'd like to show you that. Yeah. We'll look at the exception breakpoints in a moment. On that, sorry. No, maybe not. I'm out of order here. I'll get to that in a moment. I've done that. So the other one is notify. So sometimes people like to use Vardem debugging, right? But that, of course, breaks up your page layout often. But what if I tell you there's another way of doing that? So since Xdebug 3.1, I'm going to guess, there is this Xdebug notify function, which you can give any PHP variable to. And this notification doesn't go through the output, like you get with Vardem or DD or whatever you call these things. But instead, the information gets sent over the debugging protocol. So it will show up in your IDE, but not in your output. So at the moment, I have set no breakpoints, except for the one in Drupal kernel. No, I disabled that too. So if I now load this, maybe not. Let me pause this. There we go. Pause and listen. I wish I was just saying stop program. It's not that. Go back to my IDE and, well, if I had removed the Xdebug info, okay, I'll get that. Then it wouldn't have messed up the layout. It did now anyway because I had forgotten to remove this line in the file, right? Let me do that as well. Ooh, let's try this one more time. Save this, reload. Then you don't get any strange output. But if you look in the output of the IDE, in the debug console, it actually did dump the contents of this variable. So you can then expand it and inspect what it said in there. It is set to some levels deep, not all of them, because it doesn't know how much you would like to see after the request is ended. But this is a configuration setting that you can make. So yeah, you can now dump things that don't mess up your layout, and you still can, in your IDE, see what happened in here. Which I think is also a nice thing to see. Right, back to the slides. Demo that. Alright, so the breakpoints that I showed you with a demo, let's have a look at how this works. Now, in order to figure out how this works, you need to create log files. And I didn't quite know how to do that, so I don't know how to make extra configuration settings in DDEV, because I don't know what I'm doing, pretty much. But there's actually a way of adding things in the project that I have. Oh, this is very small, isn't it? It's so small I can't see it. Where does this go? It's in DDEV, Web Builder. I put in this extra Docker file. Now, this does a whole bunch of things. I copied this from the documentation and modified it. Because I already showed you that I wanted to run something, Xdebug running in Git, and this used to work with just Packle, or something that was already in the distribution. But the important thing is that I actually load my specific ini file. I wish I could have figured out a way how to get it from the local file system. There must be a way. So maybe somebody can explain it to me. But if I open this, it should open in my browser. No, so it downloads it. But we can inspect what's in there by going into my DDEV project. I use PHP. I can't remember where this file is, but it is then this file here. So there's a few changes that I've made in here. So I could basically copy the standard one but added these 3 lines. Because the path mapping that I showed you is still experimental, you need to turn it on. And then I set the log level to 11, because I like 11. 10 is fine, but anything higher than 10 will work. And there's also this tmp/xdebug log. So I will delete that file, because there's a lot of things in there now. Then reload my Drupal file. And then, did I listen? Yeah, that should have worked. So if I now open this file, there's a lot of stuff in here. There is so much things in here that basically tells you everything that's gone on with the communication between Xdebug and PHP. It tells you which path mapping files have been loaded. It tells me that there was an error with one of them, because there's no path mappings in it. That's because I put a hash in front of it, right? It will tell you about control sockets. I'll get back to that in a moment. It will also tell you which headers it looked at to figure out whether it actually needs to make a connection. All of these things in here. And once it finally decided to make a connection, it says it's connected. And then you get the protocol information. Now, this is very verbose XML. Not useful for most people unless you find a bug in Xdebug, and then I will ask you to make one of these things. But the interesting thing is it will also tell you exactly which files and line numbers it sells and which ones it tries to map. This is a lot of information, right? In one request you easily get megabytes of information, so don't leave this on all the time. But once it starts running, you see it looping through all of these lines, and it tells you that some of these things are being mapped to not stop. And at some point, there's a lot of stuff in vendor, isn't there? Oh, this only works obviously if I actually have set a breakpoint. Silly me. I'll put it here. Do it again. We'll get there. Reload this. Did it stop? It stopped. Continue running, and now I have a useful log file there. So again, it does the same thing, but then at some point when you do run, it says it figures out that it's actually breakpoints being set. So that's an optimization in Xdebug that makes sure that it only checks for line breakpoints when a function has had any line breakpoints set on it. That saves a lot of time actually. One of these things that I do look at. But yes, it then sees that we have this breakpoint here that we set on index PHP 23, and it matches us against our current location, which is 14. That doesn't match. Okay, so I was trying to find where it was actually setting us. So the ID sets breakpoint set on line 22. It figures out that that is actually on this file, on the remote file system. It figures out that the line number is in the big block of code, the largest range. It finds that breakpoint line or line 22 doesn't have an executable code on it, and then it will map it to 23. So all of these things are in this log. This sometimes goes wrong for a reason, but this log file contains everything in there, and even for one request, how big is it? 24 megabytes. It's not so bad. Not so bad. So this log file is useful. How does this work? I showed you that. Check the log. So return values. That's the next thing I want to showcase here. I don't need this anymore. So let me set a breakpoint here on. I remove this. Set a breakpoint on this one here. Oh, this one here. No. Refuses to do that. There we go. Reload the page again. Oh, and listen. Reload the page, listen. So I'm in this send method. I don't know what it does. Also, I don't know what it returns. It's possible that it doesn't return anything, obviously. But so let me step into this. Now it sends some headers, sends contents, flushes through. It flushes through, which it is. So if it isn't true, then it returns this. So it's not going to do that, right? Skip over that. Okay, and then it does the return of this. Now, obviously, if you have returned this, you can inspect what this is at the moment. But there's many situations where return will do return and then the name of a function or a method. And in order for you to figure out what the return value is, the only way what you can do is first assign it to a variable and then return a variable, right? That's no longer true. Because I can do step in here. Why did that work here? Okay, I'll try another one. This worked when I tried it. Well, oh, okay, it worked here. Let's say we have array key exists. We do a return of that, and then of course you need to figure out what the return value is. But if in a situation where PHP and Xdebug can detect there is something to return, and it can show you, which apparently isn't always the case, or there's a bug somewhere, then it will tell you in the locals here that there's a return value, and it will tell you what this value is. So this is an extra state in between returning and it being returned. I picked the line of the return itself, but that's not really true. It is sort of in the middle in between, but I need to show line somewhere. So that is very useful in my opinion. So it should work the same for any non-built-in function too. But I don't know. Okay, here for example, I return this array, the parameters array from this, because otherwise you have to assign that first. Then you can also see all these things. I think there is a distinction if it's returned this compared to anything else. I don't know why, but I have to figure that out later. So you can inspect the return value, which I think is a nice thing to do. Let me run this to the end of the request. Now the other thing is VS Code has this thing like break on everything. That's very ominous, isn't it? But what it actually means is to break on all the exceptions, all the notices and warnings. So let me click that. Now I don't know whether Drupal uses exceptions under the hood, even if everything goes right, or maybe there's notices. We'll find out when we reload this. If not, I know how to make it do this. So. Let me reload this. Well, it stopped somewhere, at least. It stopped on my breakpoint. Great, that's what we wanted, and then run it. So apparently, Drupal is notice-free. That's pretty good. So let me break this, because let me just throw the kernel. This is not something you can do. This is going to cause issues, obviously, but it can demonstrate the feature here. So I load this. It then stops on. So I've not done what?
Save the file.
Oh yeah, that is helpful. Thanks for being more awake than I am here. Okay, so when I've saved the file and tried again, then it actually works. Because in the variable pane here, it will now also give information about the error in here. So in this case, it's an error that is being thrown by PHP itself, which means it doesn't have a line number and file attached with it. But if it had, it will also show up here. And this extra display thing here is something that VS Code picks out of this extra fake local exception message. Oh, there is a line of file number. Apparently it doesn't show that in this thing here, but I guess it's in the call stack. It plugs this information out of this pseudo exception variable to then being able to display it. It also shows like nice big and red, which is kind of nice to have, right? So that is also something that's new in here. Yeah, I get more errors, and then PHP finally gives the ghost and dice. Oh, and now we get nice orange errors as well. You can guess why these are orange exceptions. Right. So these are the new things in the standard debugging protocol, but there's a few situations where I run sometimes long-running scripts. Long-running scripts that do lots of different things. I'm going slightly away from Drupal because I couldn't find any standard way where Drupal uses this kind of thing. But this is something I call control sockets. Now, for this, I have this other script running here in the background. This is a very useless script. I will show you what it does once I figured out how to switch my projects. I haven't figured out how to have multiple projects open at the same time. Okay. Ooh, I broke something. Let's just try it again. There we go. It did work in the end, but I don't know why I did that. Right, so I have this very useless script here. Where is it? Work manager. What it does is it's 22 lines big. It has this worker class, which has a method obtain task. And what it does, it sleeps and then returns a random number. And then I have this long-running loop that basically does obtain tasks, basically sleeps and returns a random number, and then I show the random number. Now, this script is already running, right? It's already running in the background here. Now, how do I debug this? You can't really, right? Because Xdebug only initiates a connection to the ID when the script starts, but that's already running. Now, let me put VS Code in listen mode quickly. And again, indeed, it doesn't do anything, even though it's in listen mode. And then, so there is a new command on the command line now, which I haven't really spoken much about and certainly not documented yet, which is something called Xdebug PS. Xdebug is like a command line tool written in Go. It doesn't matter where it's written in. And it is in version 0.01. But I never had to change it, so that's good enough, isn't it? But what you can do with that is basically request all the PHP processes that are currently running. So here it says that the commands, just the worker manager that I'm running on the command line, it will tell me which Xdebug version it runs, what the memory usage of it is, and also how long it has been running. That is in seconds, so yes, nearly an hour by now. So it has created lots of useless random numbers. It's like creating Bitcoin. But the interesting thing is now, I can also run pause, and then it should pause. However, because there is a multiple PHP script running at the moment, I need to tell it which process ID I want to debug. So I do that at the end. No, sorry, it goes first. And then it says ID connection signaled. That sounds ominous. What has it done? Nothing. Why not? Let's try it again. Oh, now it works. And the reason why it now works is because the first time you do it, it tells Xdebug make a connection to the IDE, which it has done, but there's no breakpoint set, so it still doesn't break, which is obvious because it wasn't instructed to do so. But when you do it for a second time, it will then also immediately initiate a breakpoint on that line. So now it then stops on the next line where it could stop. There's some timing issues, so it might not exactly be the first line, but it will stop as soon as it can, and now it has stopped here on this line 10. And it can inspect which random number is going to be returned, and inspect other variables, and indeed step over it. I was wondering, why did it wait? But there's a sleep in my program, that's why. And when you're done with this, you figured out your bug, or not, you can press continue. And then, of course, if you now set a breakpoint, it wouldn't stop again because Xdebug can only, or the ID can only send breakpoints when Xdebug is a break state, but it isn't now because it's just running your script, right? It still runs in the background here, creating more useless random numbers. But it can still run pause again, and then because the connection with the ID is already there, it will then stop on my breakpoint line. So this is how you can now initiate any sort of longer running script to still debug like these tasks that are pulled off queues, which I think is a nice way of doing that. Now, I don't know one thing, what happened here is that I don't know what this other PHP process is and where it comes from. So I need to go figure out what it is. Because the way how this works is Xdebug, the tool signals Xdebug to within 250 milliseconds of this, see whether it can do this breakpoint, but if it doesn't reply, then it decided I can't connect to it. Now, usually every 250 milliseconds is fine, because unless you run like a long-running query in your database, you will have a function call at least every 250 milliseconds, hopefully. These things, these control sockets, are kind of useful to have, but they only really work on the local system. So if I would want to do this, something running in a Docker container, the Xdebug PS also needs to run in your Docker container. The intention is that this gets built into IDEs like VS Code, so that if any of you has ever done debugging with C++ code, you might know that you can attach a debugger to an already running process, and this would allow the implementation of something similar for PHP as well. It doesn't have to be a long-running process, but of course PHP requests are usually so quick that you wouldn't have the time to select it from the list and then attach it to the request, because this is per request. So this functionality is there. It's sort of experimental on Windows, but it has been contributed, and it seems to work. I mean, the tests passed, so that's good enough for me. And now the next step here is to get us integrated into IDEs as well. People using VS Code sometimes use like this remote kind of thing. There it would work because that would run in the same container as where your code runs. In other cases, we need to come up with cleverer ways of also being able to stop process in containers. But I don't quite know how to do that yet. Yeah, I'm sure we can come up with a solution there too. So these are the control sockets. Now at the moment it only has PS and pause. If you have ideas for other things that you could do out of band while a PHP process is running, for example, maybe give a stack trace at the current location, which is certainly possible to do, then let me know and we'll see what we can implement there. Okay, let's talk about future features. That's, by the way, hard to pronounce. So the next thing after the native path mapping, when I have that done, I would like to work on a time travel mode. Now, most of the time, especially if you have your software running on one of your clients, they encounter a bug in the application. How do you debug that, right? It's a really hard thing to do, or near impossible. So what this feature would allow you to do is you would tell Xdebug to please record the whole request, including all the intermediate steps, variable assignments, function calls, dump that into a file, and then you can ship that file to you as developers, and then debug it as it was a currently running script. You can step forwards, inspect all the variables, step backwards, but the script won't be running because PHP doesn't allow stepping backwards. So this is a feature that I think can be really useful. It's also going to be a lot of work to implement. So I don't think that will happen in a year's time. And then sometimes I run into people that have problems having things connected from PHP to the IDE. That happens when there's a shared development server and people work from home. There's no way of making network connections between these locations sometimes. You can get around it sometimes by doing SSH tunnels, but it would only work for one developer at a time. And there's proxies that also work, but there's also other constraints with it, right? Should have clicked play on tape there. So yes, Xdebug, you need to remember, needs to make a connection to the IDE. My logo is PHP Storm, but it could do something else. When there's containers involved, there's sometimes issues with picking the right name. DDEV solved that by using hosted Docker internal and other solutions available too. Sometimes you have an actual firewall in the way. Firewall? That's my firewall. There's my firewall. It's not a good idea if your firewall is actually on fire. But that makes these connections impossible, right? So I've developed a way around Xdebug called Xdebug Cloud. Everything needs to have a cloud product now, which is basically a way of routing around these networking issues so that you can still debug these kind of situations. It's just coming soon. It's been running for 2.5 years, but I don't know how to make animated graphics. So this is going to stay. So yeah, that has been running for a while, and there's plenty of people that make use of that. All right, Xdebug Cloud if you want to look at it. Xdebug is open source. Many people talk about that. Open source needs to be sustainable. I don't want to talk too much about this because I don't like talking about these things, but it is important that open source becomes sustainable. You can become a patron if you'd like to. But when I do things like that, there's also support for businesses. If you want to support me, that also comes with support back for me, obviously. It goes both ways. But when doing these things, I also think it is important that you talk about not only signing up for support, but also what you do with your target. So every month, I try to make like a big list of all the things that I've worked on. This one is from August, but I've created newer ones for that, where it lists basically line by line the things that I spent time on. I also have like a monthly newsletter to these people, explaining a little bit in more detail what kind of things I have been working on, or what kinds of bugs that I encountered, or what the next version of PHP has been messing up, and I need to then fix again. All right, that's sort of what I had to talk about. I think we have 4 minutes for questions or queries, as my slide says. Anything in the room? There's one in the back.
Yeah.
I was trying to make you do exercise there.
One thing I would really like is sometimes it happens that a function is called 2 times, and somewhere in the stack trace is the point where it kind of forks, so that one function is called 1 time, and then at that point it does 2 calls to some, like in a loop or something, and that's exactly it could be like from the function I'm interested in, like 10 levels up, and that's what I want to find. So I would want to find in the stack trace to see which of them has been repeated since the last point it happened, and which of them have just been called once. So if I have a breakpoint and then I see it 1 time, and then I see it the second time, and I want to see which of the other functions in the stack trace have been repeated since then.
Oh,
it's super interesting.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that right now.
Okay.
Yeah, how would you? I don't know how to do that. Let's have a chat afterwards. There's many questions. Oh, you got the mic back. Okay, go ahead.
Xdebug info looks interesting. What version of Xdebug do I need to use, or do I need to be on the cutting edge?
Well, microphone is here. Xdebug info got introduced into 3.0, but I've been improving on that since every version. I would always suggest that you run the last possible Xdebug version that works for your version of PHP. So I don't know which PHP version you are in at the moment, 8 hopefully. And if you're, as long as you're on 8, then Xdebug 3.4 and even 3.5, which hasn't been released yet, will also work. So I would always recommend to run the latest version of software, and that is not just an Xdebug thing, that is a software thing. Yeah. Yes. Oh, hi.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Coming from another platform where we do debugging, and we have an execution pointer where we can turn back time a bit, go up a few lines, and re-execute the same code. Is that something that will be possible in the future?
So, yes, the time travel mode will allow for that. There's also, at the moment, somebody's written a command line GUI tool for Xdebug. I think it's called Xdebug 2e. I might have to look that up. Where they have actually implemented that in the IDE itself or in the debugger itself, but it would only do that for the last function that's being executed. That already helps a lot, but it would be easier if Xdebug itself did that, because it can be much more memory efficient with this kind of things. So yes, that would also be a thing. You can do slightly step back in a function to figure out how a specific variable was set or why it was set, which is usually the case where you want to look at that. Yes. Yes, I would like to implement that, but it's going to take some time.
Hey,
Hi.
a question about VS Code and Xdebug integration. So, if we have an object, for example, a render array or something, and want to find some value there, do you find any way to do this? For example, if you want to find the string hello in the long nested object or array, how to simplify this?
I'm not sure whether VS Code or any IDE lets you search in the stack traces or in all the variables that are in there. It is not something that I can probably easily do in Xdebug itself, but it would be worthwhile trying to figure out whether this is something that IDEs can implement. I would suggest, if you're a VS Code user, to send a feature request to the author of that project. He is usually quite responsive with these things. And let me know, and I'll chat with him about that.
Yeah, because now it's easier to make the HTML output using dump and use browser, but it's not a good way to do this.
No.
Okay.
But it would be a nice way if you can search in the stack trace for specific strings or values. I agree.
I think PHP store has search.
Okay. Today I learned.
I think time is over.
Time's up. Sorry, guys and girls. The slides are going to be online if I haven't put them online yet. I think I have. If you have any further questions, there's my email. Feel free to email me. I will give you an answer. It might take time. Otherwise, you can find me on Mastodon on derrickr@phpc.social. I will be around for most of the day, so feel free to come up and have a chat. And one thing I should also say that I have some stickers, but there's only about a dozen of it. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to distribute these. In any case, thank you very much. I hope this was useful and enjoy the rest of the conference.